name's Connor Bambrick. I'm with the Environmental Advocates of New York. We're an Albany-based advocacy organization. We focus primarily on lobbying state governments, so the state legislature, the executive branch. We do a little bit of accountability work for the New York State congressional delegation. Of late, we've been focusing in on the process around the federal budget and holding representatives accountable for the votes they're taking on appropriations to the EPA, for example. I'd like to start first backwards, just to get back to real quick the third question, that constitutional amendment. Environmental Advocates of New York is also a supporter. This we think would be very helpful to the municipalities while still protecting the integrity of the Forever Wild clause in the Constitution. But back to the Constitutional Convention. As you've heard, our organization is opposed to the Constitutional Convention, and there are many reasons that Zach laid out very well. But really the most basic reason for us is that it comes down to priorities. I think, when you ask most people, I imagine most people in this room, if you ask them, do you support a clean environment? Do you support clean air? Do you support clean water? I'm going to go on a limb and suggest, yeah, these are things that we like and value. If you look at some real polling numbers, just by way of additional background, I run the Air and Energy Program for Environmental Advocates, so a lot of my work centers around climate change policy. 77% of all New Yorkers believe that climate change is happening. 67% of all New Yorkers are worried about the impacts of climate change. 57% of New Yorkers believe that climate change is already impacting people here in the U.S. And this is 2016 polling data. I imagine that number will likely have gone up after this past hurricane season. In terms of action, 86% of New Yorkers support investments in renewable energy to help offset the impacts of climate change. 81% of New Yorkers support regulating carbon as a pollutant. So there's broad support from what we can tell for acting on climate, for protecting our air and water. But for us, it all then goes back to priorities. With all this great support, you'd think that New York would be amongst the most progressive states in the union on climate change. And in some areas we are, but we can certainly do a lot better. So when you're talking about a constitutional convention, this is something that takes sort of everything and puts it all out on the table. Policies can be considered really across the board. It's not just environmental policies or labor policies, it's tax policies, it's spending policies. And with that, the closest thing I can compare it to, and what I experience working in Albany, is the state's budget process. More and more, what we're seeing with the New York State budget process is a lot of issues getting rolled in there. It's not just a spending plan. It's not just how much you're going to allocate to the Department of Tax and Finance or to the DEC. It's more and more getting a lot of policy initiatives wrapped up into it. Thanks in part to the good work of some folks at this table, me and you, Michael. We're talking about upping the minimum wage or paid family leave. These are things that have been passed in the New York State budget in recent years. But with all these various issues getting rolled into this one process, you get a lot of political horse trading. You get a lot of linkage of issues that might not necessarily be naturally linked together. So if the state assembly wants to see more spending on education, maybe the state senate wants to see more spending on economic development in upstate New York. And they both agree, okay, you get the education funding, we'll get the economic development spending, let's all announce a deal and go home. That's oversimplifying probably. But so the way that we look at it from an environmental advocacy organization is, where are our legislators putting their broad support, or New Yorkers' broad support, for the environment when it comes to setting their budget priorities. Is it number one? Not usually. I think my experience, both on the outside, I also spent a number of years working in the state assembly for an assembly member not far from here. The Assembly Democratic Conference, when it comes to their priorities, I can tell you it's education, it's healthcare, it's housing, it's transportation, it's the environment. And I think that order, maybe a couple of other issues mixed in. The Republican-controlled Senate, I haven't seen evidence that the environment is anywhere near the top of their list, especially in recent years. And just to put a number on that, I guess, our state budget last year, the one we're currently operating under, is $153 billion. One of the top spending priorities, in fact, the top area of spending in that state budget is education, probably rightfully so, at $26 billion. When you scroll through all the congratulatory press releases that the legislature and the governor will put out touting all the great things in their budgets, they don't mention that they've held the Department of Environmental Conservation on a flat budget for the entire tenure of Governor Cuomo's term. And what that means, with other cost of living expenses going up over the years, is we've had a decline in the DEC budget. We've had a decline in staffing, which makes it much harder to get out there and enforce the environmental laws that we do have. So, with that, we see this constitutional convention, really opening the door for some political horse trading that could ultimately wind up harming our environment. And it's not even something that's flat out, New York is a very progressive state. But given the special interests that are going to try to influence a process like this, we're not going to see, I don't think we're going to see something that New York shouldn't acknowledge climate change. That's not likely to happen, right? But maybe we'll see something along the lines of the legislature's ability, or the power of the legislature to approve taxes. That's the legislature's authority, they have to approve taxes. Maybe we'll see something along the lines of an amendment that says, well, I think all charges and fees, permit fees and what have you, the legislature should have to approve all those too. Legislators don't like to vote on increasing taxes or fees. Yet fees and charges, what have you, are some of the primary enforcement mechanisms that DEC has to make sure that industry is complying with environmental regulations. It's one of the primary mechanisms that they're currently using to regulate carbon emissions in the state and power plants through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And tying their hands by pushing that back through the legislative process, something that on its face might sound reasonable. The legislature has to approve taxes, why not fees and charges and what have you? Could prevent New York's ability to regulate polluters, to regulate, to really act on climate change. And that's something we're concerned about. With the budget, at least we have accountability. These legislators know that they're going to have to come back and face the voters. They know that groups like ours are going to hold them accountable if they do things that are egregious when it comes to the environmental space. So we have that. With a convention, we don't have that accountability. We're not going to be able to hold these delegates accountable at the end of the day. They're going to run, they're going to get elected, and that's going to be it. And then whoever influenced them or helped to get them elected will likely have a seat at the table when it comes to the decisions that are being made. So with that, I will turn it back to Zach.